Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, the web universe out there. We are hosting Futureproofing Now webcast season number 2, episode number 17. I can't believe it's almost our 50th episode, Andrea. We have an interesting subject here. Some of our subjects are broad in scope, some of them are narrow in scope. This one in particular is interesting because I've done a lot of studying on it recently. Certainly not a lot of people know about this subject, but it's crucially important and probably a bigger part of your innovators universe in the future. We have 3 expert panelists that we will introduce shortly. They come from all different parts of the world and have a different and unique perspective on it. I'd like to introduce my fellow co-hosts, Andrea Cates. Andrea, how are you?
Great to be here, and the most important topic of the day, ecosystems of innovation. So as you said, nobody teaches it, and we're here to talk about it.
And as mentioned, we have an illustrious, esteemed panel that not only think about this stuff, but actually do it in real life too, which is always a good compliment. I ran across this stat and I used it to promote our webcast ahead of time. I found, when things start showing up in annual reports, I either get nervous because it becomes a buzzword, or I get positive because it's something that CEOs and people in positions of power and purse strings start to think about. So, and I think there's a lot of, we've talked a lot about aspiration versus reality, Andrea, like just how leadership has this vision of what they can do and then the reality of what they maybe can't do. Ecosystems maybe fall into that camp, doesn't it?
Yeah, it always scares us when something is a buzzword, right? Because it's either a buzzword or a meme. And usually it means a lot of people are talking about it. But in this case, I think the reason that ecosystem is popular right now is, I think, 2 things. One is that we're all global, and kind of overnight we've had to just adjust to so many things that we realize we can't do it alone. And second, it used to be that we had these supply chains that felt like arrows went in one direction. And now it's so clear that we have co-opetition, we have competition, we have collaboration, and there's network effect that has proven time and time again to be so important to building businesses.
Agreed. And I think just, if I look at some of the literature and kind of the zeitgeist, I guess, if you will, in terms of where people's thoughts have led in different articles over the last couple of years, there's really this transition between leading your own people and talent and leading ecosystems around you that I saw as kind of a thread, moving from business ecosystems and how do you capture value to actually how do you create it through some of these ecosystems. So we'll maybe touch on that today. And from stable environments, i.e. pre-pandemic, where maybe things happened in relatively straight lines, sometimes jagged, to post-pandemic, where things are nothing but normal. So, and it would appear that ecosystems are custom made for environments that are a little bit in flux, but maybe we'll hear differently from our panelists today. I thought we'd set 3 points of clarity just up front. We may lose our audience going, oh, I thought we were talking about ecological ecosystems. Damn, that's maybe 5 weeks from now. And just wanted to confine what we may be talking about in this. I know there's a lot of discussion and interest around ecosystems when governments want to create kind of different innovation hubs or different soft kind of entrepreneurial kind of areas. Sometimes sectors come together and say, yep, we have to do something around blockchain. And so there's like a blockchain ecosystem. And then below, it's like, well, even inside a company, there may be an ecosystem of software that people talk about. Maybe HR has 12 different pieces of software that may or may not talk to each other, and they call that an ecosystem. Or perhaps you can talk about a company and it's like Google has this ecosystem of products. Really, at least for the purposes of today's discussion, we're talking about corporate innovation ecosystems, where typically there's a hub or an owner or an orchestrator or whatever you want to call it, and a group of firms around that for mutual purposes. And I'll get into a definition here, I guess. Doesn't have to be always these, but generally open, multi-sided, purposeful. It's collaboration. It's between different parties. They hopefully contribute something to the table, usually knowledge or structures, to deliver a process and outcome that benefit all parties. And not always. Sometimes it's built on your Amazon, so I guess I'll fall in line, but oftentimes it's built on trust, collaboration, and co-created value. And we always like to produce some type of landscape kind of document. We pulled this one together before this, and just, I don't want to go through all of this because I think our panelists will probably wade through some of this, but it tends to have a different focus. They tend to take on different types of formats, and they tend to have both much different sponsors and much different players that become involved. Andrea, do you have any other kind of things to top line before we introduce our panelists?
There's one really important thought that we at Futureproofing Next think about when we think about these concepts. So if we think of a 2x2 matrix and it's we and me, and you have me now, me later, we now, we later, it's really clear that we later is a great driver for a lot of the value creation and the value and the structure of the way that value is developed in these ecosystems. So we want to talk for sure about mindsets of me now versus mindsets of we later. That's for sure. And that's a kind of overarching Futureproofing Next philosophy as well.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with no further ado, sometimes we do our 5-minute preamble and there's like this pent up demand. There's 3 smart faces looking in the other window. Let's get to them. So I think in no particular order, Johanna Fraki, and I hope I pronounce all of these names correctly, but she hails to us from Helsinki, Finland. In her actual title is leading innovation ecosystems for a company called Neste. I hope I pronounced that correctly. There's always a Finnish intonation to all of that. It is a company that is a global leader in renewable fuels, and so Johanna's role is to try to understand different kind of ecosystems that can actually help her in terms of developing renewable or circular kind of energy and fuels. Definitely has a humanistic component of their company, and she is steeped in innovation management, new business development, customer-driven innovation. We talk, I think in her new role, it's a lot about innovation culture and trying to build that. And obviously this topic, both open innovation and ecosystems, formerly of Nokia and Finland Chamber of Commerce and a number of companies I couldn't pronounce because they're Finnish. Johanna, welcome to the forum.
Thanks,
and then,
Sean.
Hello. And then Florian Corre, he is the Global Strategy Officer for Exponential AI. It's a company that's dedicated to intelligent automation and enterprise grade solutions, particularly in health, finance, and digital commerce sectors. He's ex of Deloitte and Clocks Health and Societe Generale. And Florian steeped in building innovation ecosystems as well. Welcome, Florian. And then Andrea.
I'll introduce Dr. Jeff Fry. He's VP of Innovation at Talent Path. It's a startup that's bridging the gap between traditional technology education and employer expectations. He also teaches at institutions on the topic of innovation, entrepreneurship, and others. And as a practitioner and a scholar, we're lucky that he's a heads down coder. So he's worked his way up to the C-level and has in the past worked for companies like McDermott International, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and he has a PhD that specializes in emotional intelligence from Weatherhead School at Case Western University. And we love to also mention that he's married, has 2 young boys, is a triathlete, a musician, really good at all of those, I think, and volunteers at a lot of nonprofits. So welcome, Jeff, from many, many perspectives.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right, guys, let's get straight into the questions. You read enough about innovation ecosystems and it's like, wow, these things can be complicated beasts and they don't operate like typical business. Why build them? Like, why not just do it yourself or acquire somebody or integrate a whole bunch of stuff inside and just say, we're going to do it this way? And Johanna, maybe I'll pivot to you first. Like, why go about building these things?
Yes, I see that in our time, we have 2 factors explaining why innovation ecosystems are needed. And first, there's the pace of innovation. It's accelerating every year. And there's no single company that can survive that without external partners. But very importantly, also the problems we're trying to solve today are huge, like climate change. And that's the problem Neste is tackling. It's not possible to solve that alone. So you really need to have all the ecosystem players or the value chain players participating in solving the problem. In any way, whether it's innovation ecosystem or you are in an innovation workshop, I believe strongly that the value of having people from different backgrounds produce better results. So 1 + 1 is more than 3. And that's a very good argument why to bring very different players in an innovation ecosystem. I could actually tell an example from Neste about a very complex puzzle when we are creating renewable jet fuel. So there, in that kind of effort, we really need to have regulations in place from governments. For example, Norway is the only country so far who has incentivized renewable jet fuels usage. We have to have engine manufacturers to test different fuels. We have to have airlines on board. We have to have digital solutions for airlines to get passengers on board. We need fuel distributors, airports, and we need to build our own capacity, and whatever feedstock we choose, build the whole value chain and ecosystem for that feedstock. So it's an enormous amount of players, and we need them all in order to make that happen. And even though it will still take years.
Interesting. And I mean, you're in the energy game, which, it brings up to mind just a lot of different science coming to bear, a lot of different assets coming to bear in a situation. Maybe either Florian or Jeff, just in your two environments, but which might be a little bit less asset intense. Why develop an ecosystem within either technology or some type of talent consideration?
Sure. Happy to take this one. I think, so first and foremost, I think Johanna's point on the strength in the numbers definitely exists. The other aspect is when we extrapolate it from my perspective and look at it from a global standpoint, as you stated, Sean, earlier, the ecosystems is really a recipe that brings in different ingredients. The research ecosystem, the educational ecosystem, the access to talent, access to capital, specific regulations, Johanna, you hit upon it, right? So on and so forth. There's maybe a dozen different kind of ingredients to bring together, and globally, those ingredients vary. They go up and down. You don't necessarily have the same mix. And some problems require a different mix than others. And it's hard if you remain local, if you remain insulated within your corporation to actually have access to the right mix of those ingredients. So the ability to have a network with your partners to identify the pool where a problem can be tackled in a very different way or with the right mix is essential. So for me in healthcare, a lot of what we see is twofold, is 2 to 3-fold. The first one is access to data. The ability to have enough representation where partners are going to come into play and say, all right, here's 6-month, 12-month, 18-month worth of data that represents the life of patients, life of the work of doctors, that you can try and find something that is of value. The other aspect is the way to look at it. And we found so many times where folks that are completely removed from the problem and look at the data, look at the problem in a very different angle, say, well, this is what I see now, and this is how you could solve your problem. Yeah, I'm taking it completely differently, but it is a solution to your problem. And then the aspect of capital and regulation is very helpful as well, where you're able sometimes to not be stifled right from the get-go. You have an ability in some ecosystems to get started within the confine of what's provided, and then to make it more global or bring it back to an environment that's a little bit more constraining. So at least you don't stifle yourself to start with. You go big, you try, you maybe fail, or you succeed and you succeed back into a smaller environment. So that would be some of the additional facets I would bring, Sean.
Interesting. Jeff, toughest position. Johanna and Florian have brought up great angles. Any additional ones that you would suggest for the reason for building ecosystems?
Yeah, so I think there was a diversity thread along there, and I had written down diversity as soon as you asked the question, and they both brought it up. I think right now there's a big push on diversity for many reasons in our environment, but the research shows that if you have a diverse set of individuals looking at a problem, you're going to get a better solution, right? And so I think there's a there's a case for diversity in every way, shape, and form. But I take a little bit more of a humanistic approach on some of this. Some of my research is on burnout, and is on companies, corporations, and people themselves, teams and individuals and leaders actually failing at something because they're pushing so hard themselves at a problem. And I see, you know, in both of those examples, and then in many examples, larger corporations, even if there's hundreds of people involved, that when you don't have enough of the diversity, when you don't have enough of the suppliers, or you know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, you know, stuff can happen, that the individual itself suffers. And those individuals are the ones that have to come up with the ideas, right? The teams, the groups, the larger companies, they're made up of individuals. And so a lot of my research has to do with the fact that a more diverse, a more emotionally intelligent, and I can bring up that word later, a more emotionally intelligent workforce actually has higher innovation levels and better outcomes for the business. And so I think the reason to bring in a lot of people is because you get that kind of factor when something's up, something's down, when, you know, you've got this diversity across there. And then as individuals, as companies, we don't lose the ideas, we don't burn out, we don't get upset with them. We actually launch them, and, you know, they actually come to pass. Ideas become reality.
Nice builds, nice builds. And you've put a couple of cues in for something that you're going to bring up later, perhaps, Jeff. Andrea, you want to pivot us to the second question here?
Yeah, so this is something that, you know, even though we do this and record it, so anybody could be listening to this at any point in today or weeks, months, years in the future, the notion of this pandemic changing the ecosystem equation for good or for bad, I think it has a lot to do with disruption in general and opportunities and forcing functions in general. Is there someone who wants to jump in and have a strong point of view about, does the pandemic change this ecosystem equation? And once again, for good or for bad? Anyone want to jump in? So Florian, let's start with you.
Yeah, one of the aspects where we've been challenged with the ecosystem in itself is the physical presence. A lot of the approach, methodology, or kind of process and creativity is bringing people together. And so we've jumped on the cameras. We've used a lot of tools that allow for, you know, online design. Yet it is hard to not be in person, to read the emotional cues of the participants, the folks coming in. There's the burnout, as Jeff was pointing out, of being on cameras and having to focus on the screen, but seeing something distracting along the line. And so I think what's been fantastic with the pandemic is it's helped us validate what's great and what's necessary in the ecosystems. It's also helping us remove some of the things we thought would never happen, but actually, you know, don't break and keep on working forward. What is tough though is then how do we keep the momentum and adjust the elements of the ecosystem, such as being in person, for example, that is required and is challenged right now. And we're in some conversations, we're almost asking, are the participants to an ecosystem essential workers, and do we need to try and bring some of those workers first back into the office so that they can keep on being the fuel of some of those transformative innovations? Interesting question, and a fair question to ask. It's been definitely a big impact on that aspect, and a change in disruption that we've been looking at very closely.
I have a quick follow-up because Sean and I call ourselves rational optimists. So knowing that there's a lot of bad, could you name one very specific, you know, because proximity used to be a big positive, and in when you can't travel, proximity is gone. In ecosystems, what's really lovely is that it's so global and it can be, you know, ubiquitous, that proximity might not be the thing that matters. You talked about the ability to collaborate as perhaps being an essential worker skill, you know, to really do that in real time. What's something really positive that you've noticed? You have one quick example of like, wow, the pandemic really forced this really positive thing to happen.
Yeah, one of the aspects has been about being more digitally organized, and formalizing folks in ways where there's actually a panel of tools that you may not have used as effectively as part of your ecosystem, that actually once everybody kind of gets behind it, and it creates a lot of, or streamlines a lot, the engagement, the collaboration aspect. And so that pushes and forces more of the conversation to exist, so that the tools can help do the rest in the background, and listening more with intent, and trying to really understand where the folks and the participants are coming from, so that everybody's experience and perspective are better understood. As I would say, actually two aspects of what's been very beneficial to that.
So yeah, that's great. Johanna, I saw you raise your hand. Just, do you want to build on that and just give one positive for the rational optimists in the crowd?
Well, yes. Before March, I would have said that it's impossible to build new innovation ecosystems remotely. But you know, as we don't have any other option, it turns out it works. It's not probably as fun, probably not as effective, but it's possible. And the positive thing is that now, as nobody is traveling, it's much easier to reach out for people. They are, at some point, they are at home.
You know, that's interesting. So in a sense, maybe we've democratized proximity, because
Yes.
being next to somebody's country or easily accessible by train or whatever is no longer the number one. You know, everyone's equal here, which I hadn't thought of. That's super interesting. So Jeff, same thing. You want to just build on something positive, rational optimist?
Yeah, I've heard, you know, and seen more digital transformations take place over the last few months than ever, right? In history, I think, and some of those forced, right? I've seen more forced innovation sprints happen, and had done more forced innovation sprints over the last few months than I have in a long time. But the idea there then is, it's arguably stuff we should have been doing already, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's the schools, you know, being able to do the remote learning and to say, oh, well, no, we can't do that. And, you know, I mean, there's lots of things that are going on right now. Arguably, we should have been doing that stuff already, but everybody was, you know, I'm not sure that this forced this into it, and then it won't be the same. Right. You mentioned this slide being up here, no matter what, it has changed things, right?
Yeah.
This is a mile marker. We're going to be looking back at this and saying that happened then, and in years and years to come, because it is such a force, and it has changed things. And, you know, a lot of times for the good, because again, we've arguably should have been doing this stuff already.
Well, it's interesting, since you're in technology too, we talk about technical debt, right? Like where you're coding something and you really know you need to go back to square 2 and 4, but let's just keep plugging forward. And so you have all this tech debt that's built up. So we were looking at this kind of like the, you know, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of debt. Like we had flipped classrooms, what, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? There were all these tools that were kludged together, but now suddenly it's like, oh, we can do flipped classrooms. So I like what you're saying, that this could just be this moment, even when there's not a pandemic, where someone's like, okay, what's the forcing function we can use, as if this is urgent, to get everyone on the same page and move forward at the same time.
Yes. And we force those in different places. You know, there's folks that I help advise, you know, startups and things. And I'll say, what if, and I'll throw out something that absolutely could never happen. Right. But it's to get to here. I'm throwing this out. I just need them to get this far. But you got to throw this thing out there that absolutely might never happen in order for them to get from here to here. Now everybody's brain, this did happen. Now everybody's brain has to catch up, and the technology has to catch up, and everything else, the ecosystems, et cetera.
I love that. Well, back to you, Sean. Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I find kind of, if we take a 1990s mindset to how to run a company versus a 2020 mindset, the movies that we would film about 2020 would be quite different. My hope is, if you're an ecosystem builder, it'd probably be a lot more collaborative than something like American Psycho, or something that might have been born out of the 90s. So just maybe we'll start with Jeff perhaps here. Just, you know, as the leader of an ecosystem, you know, the average ecosystem I think I saw has about 44 different companies or startups involved in it. You know, there's got to be a benefit to the entire ecosystem. Otherwise, you know, people just don't become involved. So as a leader, like, is there a different mindset associated with it than merely running a company of assets?
Yeah, I'm back to my emotional intelligence research, actually. I mean, you know, there's management techniques that you have for sure, right? There's 2x2s and structures, and there's pyramids and the 3 ways of this and the 5 ways of that. Absolutely. And I teach all that in my innovation courses because that's the academic side, and you have to do that, right? They have to know these 5 things or this 2x2 for sure. Then there's the real world of actually how you get it done. And there's a lot of technologies you can use, but those are just tools, right? So you have to have the mindset of bringing people into the fold. You have to have the, you know, if you think about 5 things of emotional intelligence, just a couple of them, empathy. You need to have empathy so you can understand the problem, the people, the problem that you're solving, so that you can take what you've got and you can do that. And you have to push that empathy down to your network and your ecosystem for them to understand the problem so that they can solve it, right? That collaboration, right, is part of emotional intelligence. So if you don't have that collaborative mindset, you're not going to be able to do that. So I find that there are leaders, and I'm educating these folks along the way as well, both from a higher education mindset, but you know, C-level executives, doing workshops for them as well, and saying, look, these are the components of emotional intelligence, right? And some things you need to do, and these are how you force them down into your organization in a certain way. So a lot of folks are closed off, have a closed off mindset, especially if they have a great idea and they've got a network of people, even if it's 10, 20, and they don't want to release it to that 40, 50, because they think, okay, if I let this go, it's not going to be as good. I'm not going to be able to control it. And I'm afraid someone's going to steal it. There's lots of different ways. You've got to break through that and realize that you can get that out there in a way that all these people, when they come in, will actually do that. So, I mean, for me, empathy, to be able to understand people's problems, you know, knowing yourself, obviously, and where your limits are, and then being able to force that collaboration down to others, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I mean, certainly if you look at CEOs, I mean, I don't know if empathy has been the number one thing that's got somebody into the corner chair, right? So it is an emergent field of leadership, I suppose. Johanna, I mean, you're heavily involved in doing this, likely across countries as well. Is there a difference in terms of going about building ecosystems as the leader?
Well, I think this ensuring a win-win-win situation is really necessary for the ecosystem orchestrator. So making sure that the ecosystem value proposition is very strong to each participant, so everybody gets something out of that. It doesn't work without that. Of course, on the way of operating, like openness and transparency, fairness to all parties participating, kind of in detail, perhaps clear rules of onboarding and offboarding the ecosystem. These are all these kind of very hygiene factors in making this work. Perhaps one interesting thing which I've experienced is that one key mindset which probably wasn't there in the 90s. So collaboration over competition.
Yeah.
So understanding that if you invite your fierce competition to the same table, you might actually produce something really great out for both of you. And this is much easier said than done. But in principle, that could be a very interesting mindset to follow.
I find some of these blockchain consortia that bring together some of the world's biggest banks that have been clubbing each other over the heads for the last century. Quite interesting kind of case studies for that, Johanna. Florian, any ads here in terms of just a different mindset heading into this?
I don't want to add too much. Rather double down on what Johanna has just said. It's absolutely fantastic. The collaboration versus competition. You see that in healthcare as well, with preclinical trial research, where the global pharmas come together, share data, share knowledge, so that they can get to drugs far more quickly. They still have their own IP. They still have their own, secret sauce, but they recognize that there's so much more value in partnering at the beginning. I would double down on that aspect.
My hope is middle of pandemic and finding a vaccine. There's some of that going on between some of those companies too, although the stakes are large too. Andrea, you want to go with this one?
So this is really an interesting one because we were talking about the shift that's occurred. It hasn't been that, it's been pretty recent, really, the shift that occurs in multi-sided markets suddenly because of technology capabilities, or as you were saying, all of a sudden it's an ecosystem where you used to be doing competition, and this is a new world order. So what are some factors, and this is actually, despite the fact we try to be optimistic, what are the sins? Really interested in what do you do really wrong to erode the trust, to break it down, to get into the wrong mindset? Who wants to talk about these the biggest sins first, perhaps the negative? What do people do wrong? What can we avoid? Florian, do you want to start with something? Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And I think there is an interesting dynamic and an interesting journey that we see oftentimes. There's a group that recognizes that maybe their current state of operations, their current state of running their business could benefit from either being a participant or creating an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem. They create it, and then they recognize it starts being costly, and then they start bringing it back to their original operating construct, start putting it the pressure of growth or revenue or profitability, and it kind of stifles itself. And so what started as a great movement for collaboration, for expansion, for discovery, starts as such, creates a little bit of good momentum, but then stifles itself and comes back to the traditional sins of the past. And so I think the mind shift, I think, that has to operate is recognize what the true value is in a innovation ecosystem, and how do you measure the health and the evolution of that ecosystem, and eventually ties it for what it is. Now, I do think there is a value in which, what you were referring to, Jeff, earlier, I think, with the emotional quotient of a leader and the innovators that bring that in, the ability, I think, to bridge the gap between traditional corporate structure and the innovative ecosystem structure, so that there's an understanding of what needs to give and how that flows from one to the other, would be a part of the success factor.
So anybody else want to share a sin? I like this idea of, stifling yourselves and kind of falling into old habits or old metrics. Those are really important sins to avoid. Johanna, you want to jump in and share one?
Yes, I haven't really experienced this, but I could imagine that breaking trust between the partners, and easy example is on IPR side. That would be a big sin.
Yeah, it's interesting because IPR and issues like that have really shifted the whole set of standards around them. So people have to learn to be walking in ambiguous territory quite a bit. Yeah. So I think that's interesting. Jeff, you want to jump in and add a sin?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an echo though. If you have the wrong people doing what you're attempting to do, right? It's that mindset. So if you're asking an individual to be innovative and to get on board with the collaborative network and all the other things but they're of the mindset, the old guard mindset, you do need to have a group of people who have the new mindset. So one of those is not just the structure of it, but the individual selection, even the people that you bring into it. And I think we'll talk about that. I think is who do you bring into it? And I think one of the biggest issues is bringing the wrong person into the ecosystem, because it can plant a little seed that becomes very, very, very bad across that. So one of those is make sure you choose wisely who you're bringing in and who you're doing that with.
Well, I love what you're saying, and we'll get into some of the same themes in these other questions. We have a lot more to cover, but one of the things that you're saying is interesting, which is how do you really assess? One of the things that Sean and I love is assessments and figuring out that, who should be in the room, what you're measuring for, what you're factoring in to the question of who should be in the room. And it's been tough because in the past, the only metrics we had were old performance metrics. So what are the new metrics that we can use? And I'll leave that as an unanswered question, but that's a really interesting point that you brought up, Jeff. So Sean, back to you. Let's go to the next topic.
Yeah, no, it's Jeff's point's almost like it's almost becoming an HR practitioner. It's like, you know, bad employees spread to other employees, bad ecosystem partners probably do the same thing. I could have phrased this question, okay, what happens when the lawyers get involved? But I'll phrase it a little bit differently here. You know, you've got all these bundle of benefits happening outside. And then you got, oftentimes in innovation terms, we call it, well, there's the edge and then there's the core organization that will either accept something or resist it and kind of organ reject it. So these massive benefits that travel outside your company, any best practices here in terms of bringing stuff inside, both in terms of not seeing these ideas as foreign bodies that should be resisted, and then secondly, looking at, yeah, we could probably go about a route to market or a route to innovation much differently than maybe customarily we did when we did it alone. So Johanna, what about yourself on this one? Any thoughts here in terms of bringing benefits inside the companies?
Well, the most obvious one, of course, is communication. So kind of communicating as much as possible about the ecosystem work inside and outside. Because of course, if you make it public, it draws interest from your own employees as well. But what is interesting is then trying to immerse your own employees in the ecosystem work. So whatever innovation workshops you arrange, or hopefully some events, some days, then try to have as much different employees from all over the company to participate. It's quite amazing. Remember, sometimes having this kind of deep dive sprints with customers and salespeople participating there, and they said that they learned more in 8 hours than in their 20-year career with that customer. So that's a good example of how it could work.
Yeah, it is interesting. Just kind of the average executive kind of lives and breathes with about the same 15 people over and over. So not surprisingly, when you get somebody in from the outside, they appear brilliant, right? Jeff, any additional tactical, strategic thoughts here?
Yeah, I usually go on the personal side, and she's spot on. I mean, that is to get as many people involved inside the organization to help them understand what's going on. I think that's one of the best things from the human side. You can do that. I mean, from a value side to the organization, I've seen, if we go back to one of the sins potentially, is to separate these folks, right? Is to say, this is the group, all you innovative people get in a room and you be innovative over there, right? And you do that in a completely separate track. And maybe it's just a revenue stream that comes back to the business. You're missing out, right? Unless you integrate that into the organization and you create a path ahead of time, a mindful path, through procurement, through finance, through HR, and you create a mindful path for these ideas and these solutions to navigate into the company and through the company, you won't see the benefit in the company. You'll just see a bottom line result, right? You'll see some revenue, which is great. And you want that. But if you want to see that permeate through the rest of the organization, you've got to involve all of the different sets. So if your technology group is completely separate from the technology that's happening in the ecosystem, you've missed out. So take that group, make sure they understand it, make sure you've involved those people and get them all through. And then the corporation itself will actually see, all parties involved, all departments will actually see the growth and not just, a bottom line hit to your revenue.
Yeah. And Florin, any other thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. This one, from my perspective, is also the target, and a little bit of what Jeff was eliciting. And Andrea, you made the comment earlier of technical debt. There's also operational debt in many ways. And so when you look into your target business platform, the technology, the operations, the partners you have, the ability to make sure that the platform you run as a business is going to be the place for all of your innovation to land and operate, so that you effectively can not only insert yourself, but also scale and grow from there, enables a continuous evolution and scaling, and diminishes as fast as possible the potential conflicts in technical and operational debt that would be created by collision or inadequate insertion, right? So that aspect of the target and the way you think about the platform, the business platform you run, is as important as the innovation in itself.
Interesting. A lot of tactical brilliance here, right? Like as much as you can try to plan this out, there it comes down to a lot of kind of hand holding and kind of assiduous understanding of what's going on inside your company. Andrea?
So I call this the 7th inning stretch only because Sean forces me to use sports analogies. So we now have to think of, without incriminating anybody or naming specific names, we would love for you to tell a story. And so, you know, you can generalize it, you know, I was at company X, but these stories, what we found in the Futureproofing Next audience is people love narratives like this. So is there an example that you can share that illustrates the importance of doing the ecosystem versus drawing a whiteboard about an ecosystem where, you know, like where you really feel the sizzle of, wow, you know, we're doing it and this is amazing. So Johanna, we'll start with you. A story, please.
A story. Yes, I worked with a company X and we had a brilliant idea about a new innovation ecosystem. And the kind of simple answer to your question is time. So you can plan this quickly, but execution is really, really taking a long time. So in this particular case, there were not so many companies and they were participating, so you could have thought that it's easy. But it was decided that it's not a talking club, but it's a doing club. So we get together in order to get together some projects going on. But it took 9 months before the first real project actualized. And because it just takes the time to build the trust, to slowly start to talk about roadmaps and plans and explore common grounds and avoid the competition and thinking and so forth. But then
that's actually very interesting. So does someone want to do yes and kind of build on something like that? Is there a story that you can tell that would illuminate this? Who wants to go next? Or Jeff, you want to go? Do you have a story that you can tell of something that really illustrates what it's like when it's working, when you're doing it?
Yeah, I can. So I hear ideas a lot, right? I hear, I have this idea, and a lot of my past and even now has been in playing matchmaker. So I've got a person that's doing something, this idea over here, a company that might be able to use that, some customers that are of a different company. And so playing matchmaker between all of those is very interesting, to be able to do the introductions and then try to shepherd that along to make that into an ecosystem, right? And so I do have a story where we heard some ideas, understood who the players involved were, probably the fact that they were hesitant to get involved with each other, right? You've got kind of a little bit of the story I told before where you've got individuals who are hesitant to talk about their ideas and to be able to get those people to share. So I actually had the case to be in a room with some individuals, and I said, hey, let's talk about your ideal customer for a second. And they said, okay, let's talk about our ideal. And here's the person, and we talked about it for a little while. And I said, well, by the way, the customers are on the phone right now. And they didn't know that I had dialed in the customers, their actual customers, their first customer, their most recent customer, the one that used them the most, and one that used them the least and said, I don't want to have anything else to do with you on social media. So they were on the phone, and I said, sorry guys, but this is what it, and they, and getting them to come together and go, they're actually there. Let's talk to them. Well, let's bring in this other company that might be able to help you. Let's bring in this. And there's some techniques that I have to be able to make people collaborate with each other. But the epiphanies that people have when they get the other company that they didn't think they could ever work with in the room and start talking to them and understand their business and understand why they exist and some other things. And then to put those two together and then have the customers, to see it go from 2 to 5 to 10 to 50 is absolutely an amazing thing. But getting from the 2 to 10, really rough. And so I'd say in practice, what's the difference between planning? You can draw it out on a whiteboard. But then convincing all those people that that line should exist to go between them and that other company, not the most easy thing to do in the world. And you got to have some tactics to be able to make it happen.
Well, the takeaway from that, and we won't make everyone answer every question. If Florian, you want to go to the next one, we're happy to do that. But my takeaway from this is actually this notion of, doing, you can talk about it as much as you want, but the ability to experience what you're trying to explain theoretically and just, jumping into the deep end at some point, it sounds like doing it together, making it together. And it seems like both of you talked about that. At some point, you have to stop talking about it and just start dealing with the discomfort of, oh my gosh, we're doing it. So Sean, back to you.
All right, our last few questions here are kind of the rapid fire rounds, and then we do some learning of what we've all learned together today at the end. So expecting kind of if this was Fox or CNN TV, or just rapid fire 10-second thoughts on some of these. Where do you guys learn about building great ecosystems? Because trust me, I never learned this in business school. This was not germane to kind of both that time period, and also I don't think too many professors had actually done it successfully in real life. So just Florian, maybe over to you. You've worked at Deloitte, you've worked at a number of places. Like how do we find out how to do these things before we actually do them?
I think it's two sides. The one is what Andrea just said, is do it and try and fail fast forward is a big mantra for me. The second part is my network. I constantly get back in touch with former colleagues, current colleagues, friends, and try and see what their experiences are, what their expertise is, and how I can learn from it constantly. So that would be my two aspects that I bring together.
Cool. Johanna?
Yes, there's not so much resources around on how to do this well, but there are ecosystem examples. So exactly, when you know somebody from your network, for example, I was thinking of exploring, Nokia had also this kind of network or ecosystem around Forum Nokia, like Apple has the app store. So kind of there are a lot of, it's totally different industry. It was totally different time, but there's a lot of learning you can get from those experiences.
I presume you got to shape that learning too to your own environment. There's just not one way, I imagine. So, Jeff, any thoughts? You actually teach this stuff, so maybe we should all be going to you on this. But any thoughts in terms of where you get the good stuff?
Hey, it's going to be unorthodox, but inspirational YouTube videos. I'm not joking. I mean, there's how you see the kind of third world country person, and then the drone flies in and delivers medicine and something. Hey, watch that. Doesn't that make sense? Shouldn't that have already been done? Shouldn't somebody have done? Isn't that something good? Everybody shakes their head. Yes. Nobody says it's a stupid idea. And then what you do is you break that down and you think, drone manufacturer, hospital, medication, nurses, doctor's script, where the place is, and you draw that innovation network out and go, wow, this is a big deal to get that one thing to happen. What do you want to do to get an inspirational YouTube video out to the world in 6 months from now? What are you going to do? How's that going to work? And that goes for higher ed and executives alike. Show them the YouTube video, make them draw out and say, what YouTube video do you want to have out there that goes viral and millions of people see it because you did this cool thing? But you have to get all these people involved.
Interesting. I love it. Combo of multimedia, mind mapping, and a bit of storytelling. We like that. Andrea?
Yeah, this is going to have to be really quick. So a metric that doesn't work, don't tell us that one, right? Because we know all of those. But if you had one metric where you're like, okay, someone's going to walk in the room and go, hey, perfect, your ecosystem's really healthy, it's working. What's one thing that you would say for sure, Sean and Andrew would walk into your room and you would tell us to look for? Johanna?
There's some pilots or demonstrations or whatever the ecosystem is built for that is coming out.
Great. Florian?
Velocity to scale, how fast and how many ideas make it to the consumers.
Got it. And Jeff?
The NPS of the actual ecosystem members.
Net Promoter Score, NPS. Yeah,
Yeah.
Great. Okay, yes. Perfect. Okay, great. Next one.
I love it. And why don't you tackle this one? Because this is your
Well, okay,
you
so
love
we have
bedfellows.
we have this word. I think it's Shakespearean, but we use the word bedfellows. And when we were doing keynotes recently, people love these weird words, especially Sean and I go around the world, and they have to look it up. Well, actually, people who speak English as a first language have to look it up because it's a word, bedfellow. What does that mean? What we mean by it is someone who's trustworthy. Where you're not just symbolically doing a transaction with them, but you're in bed with them. Like, for all of those reasons, there's an interdependency, there's a shared values, and everybody's getting something out of it. And once again, mutual trust. So same thing. If you're going to find someone like that, we know what not to look for. Thanks for sharing all that. What's something you would really say, yep, okay, this has bedfellow potential? Jeff, do you have one? Something that you say, yep, this one has good potential for being an ecosystem bedfellow?
Yeah. Again, I go back to that collaboration. We said it, it's a theme, but a willingness to open up their ideas, to open up the organization, to let you, if we're talking about bedfellows, under the covers, if I.
There you go. Thank you for extending our metaphor.
And to not shroud what they're doing, and to open up. And if you've got that, then that mutual trust can be involved, and you can kind of move forward.
Great. So Johanna, what would you say is one thing you look for? It's like, yep, this person has potential, or this party has potential.
That is interesting what you said, that person. And Jeff earlier also talked about people. But sometimes when you start scanning whom should you partner with, you are looking for companies, and there might be 300,000 people working for that company, or 5 people working in that company. But that's exactly the interesting point, that you really want to work with that organization, but then you have to be very careful who there is your bedfellow. So it's really a people business after all. I think that's
super interesting. It was almost a slip of the tongue that I made, and now I realize that it was a slip of the mind, right? Like it's actually not a small thing to differentiate, and you might have a company that's a yes and a person that's a no, or vice versa. So that's super interesting. I think that's a good learning for me. Florian, what's one criterion?
Skin in the game. What do they have to lose by participating? And if they don't participate well, what are they going to lose?
Perfect. And we'll spare you the pig and chicken Texas story there. But yeah, skin in the game. So Sean, last one.
Last one here, and then we'll do a quick around the horn. But we're all in the venture game and building ecosystems, and we have jealousies. We must envy other people that do it so well. Who's on your envy list right now? Just there you go, man. Based on talent, based on understanding the tea leaves that's out there, who's really good at doing this? Anybody want to start?
I could start with maybe again another unorthodox answer, but instead of kind of naming a company, there are a lot of innovation hubs that are popping up inside these cities and inside universities, where it's a group that was almost like a co-working space. But this co-working space offers then a little bit of classes, or some networking events or things. And out of these co-working spaces, where you've got seemingly organizations who wouldn't necessarily work together, but they're in startup mode, and so they start to collaborate a little better. 3 ideas become one idea and gel into a company or something that looks like it's going to rule the world, because you had multiple people in this co-working space, and these individuals who are creating these hubs are very smart and getting strategic about doing that. And so I feel like the next kind of wave, even though we're maybe socially distanced, I wish they would have called it physical distance, not social distance, because we can still be social while we're physically distanced. But anyway, I think that these spaces are creating environments like that. And I've seen really great things come out of these as I kind of track them across the country, across the world. I mean, they're happening in other places across the world, obviously. So I'd watch out for those, and maybe look to your local ones to see if you can find one, see what's happening in there, see if you can get inside that and see what brains are coming out of that.
Cool. And Florian, just you've come from a number of different industries. Any kind of corporate ecosystem builds?
Yeah, I was going to echo Jeff's point, and taking it from some of the governmental agencies, where they are limited in their ability to go fast always, because there's a very procedural thing that they can go against. Money is limited, tracked very precisely, and so their ability to bring in different agencies together, to try things differently as well, and still be genuinely very innovative and transformative in their environment through very complex pressure that they absolutely cannot remove, has been an interesting, fascinating way to look at it as well. So another different angle to bring to your growth of understanding of what the ecosystem may look like.
Agreed. And then Johanna, just always love having a European, Asian, whatever perspective. Maybe you've got one that we've never heard of before, and it's like, whoa.
I
Really?
hope you have heard about this. It's not a corporation, but I'm building on Jeff's example of this university startup ecosystem. So the local university here in Helsinki, Aalto University, they built some 10 years ago kind of quite strong startup community, which became later Slush, which is one of the biggest startup conferences in the world, and kind of with great collaboration with corporations. So I'd like to name that as the best example.
No. You can definitely go for home soil rights there. And then toward the end here, we just, what did we learn today, guys? What it belies, I guess, a little bit of good listening skills. Maybe I'll go to Andrea first as I let that percolate. What did we learn today, Andrea?
I really loved that moment where we had the point of view around company and people, because trust is so important in all of these. And I hadn't really thought about how important it is to not just make one be the lead and the other be the back end, but they're both really important. So you can have, as we were saying, the right company has all the right cool stuff going on. The individual has a mindset or metric or something in their field of vision that's keeping them from really getting full value. So I thought I learned a lot from just thinking about that. And that will probably be something that becomes a blog in the future as I think about that.
Excellent. Florian, what did we learn today?
Yeah, from my perspective, we emphasize that the ecosystem really is a living, breathing mechanism, organism, and brings in different elements at a different point in time. There may be a self-centered perspective at first that needs to start with the me now, as you said, Andrea, evolves later to the we later. Really love this one. And the ability to really still collaborate, even though the proximity is distanced while we go through the pandemic and other aspects. So that aspect is really driving it home for me.
And Jeff, you're a teacher, a learner. What did we learn?
Yeah, I would say personally that the corporate ecosystem doesn't have to be so corporate or isn't so corporate. And that maybe that goes to what Andrea said and Florian just said, that if you think about the word corporate and what that means and how it makes you feel, the ecosystems that we've been talking about don't have to be so corporate, if you get my meaning. Yep.
No, it's a behavioral trait we have to sometimes get out of our systems. Johanna, you're playing anchor person on our group. What sum 8 for us? What did we all learn?
I'm coming back to this people business. So it might be a selection of technologies and skills and corporate stuff, but it all comes to people. So. Yeah. And this emotional intelligence, which is involved in this one. That's my learning.
Which, I mean, if we triangulate everything that you've just said, it makes people like you, corporate venturists / ecosystem builders, really important, because if it's a blend of people and organization and you are the front people for a lot of your external activities, you know, you're almost like the brand as far as ecosystems go. So it's, so yeah, that's an interesting learning from my standpoint. We have like the 1 minute housekeeping that we usually do. Obviously, we want to thank our expert panelists today. Here's where you can find them. They were amazing, and it's kind of the silly season of the late summer. So just to have people step up and actually be around even is wonderful. So thank you for being available. Thank you for being around, and thank you for being so vested in our subject. And then, interesting. I love Zoom sometimes. Well, we don't, I will leave the housekeeping without a supporting deck. And Andrea, do the Sammy Davis tap dance for me right now.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that we really liked is I like to come away from these really inspired. And there were some real big surprises around this because to me, it was not clear that people were going to come out front and center. And it was also not clear that I really liked the fact that you were kind enough to create some fiction around some stories that people can use as news they can use.
And I just do it without the supporting of a deaf.
Sean, do you want me to, I can share screen if you want me to try.
No, that's all right. I think we're in the wrap up anyway. I think just as we look at the end of our webcast here, myself and Andrew are coming out with a book this month. We'd love everybody that's out there to at least have a look at it. It's kind of like birthing a baby, so we're quite proud of it. And we think it looks good. We've, I think, stepped across that threshold that says, yeah, this is amazing. We'll also have another webcast 2 weeks from now. Actually, in 3 weeks from now, we'll focus one of our special webcasts on a book on September 29th this month. And I'm trying to think of other big things, but certainly one of the things that I might be looking at is just looking at getting the same group of people and maybe a few others together and minting and codifying how people lead innovation ecosystems in the future. So, and Andrew has gamefully tried to recover our deck in time for the end of it, but
there we go. Yeah, so we've got the book that's coming out, which is the first visual. The next is this notion of how we are creating a community. We really like what you said about Slush. You know, we would love to be something like Slush, where there are people who are invested in the thinking around future-proofing next. And so this is part of what will happen post-book. It's more than just a book. Our first books were books. This is not a book. It's a community. It's a way of engaging. So people like yourselves, we hope, will be part of our guild and community. And then, as Sean was saying, Sean, you want to take it from here, the book launch?
Yeah, no, just we're doing, I guess everybody can participate, but we're going to theme every month with a different continent or different geography of the world. So our North American official launch is September 29th, with the book being the actual physical softcover book being available before. And then our next webcast is the Change Talent Gap. We've talked a lot about people and talent here today. We're addressing it once again from an innovation perspective on September 22nd. So that is us for today. We've got in close to under the hour with 5 of us on screen, which is, you know, a fair accomplishment. So thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Andrew, again. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye now, everybody.